While taking action will get you started initially, momentum is what enables you to do your highest and best work. Momentum is what gives you that feeling of deep and lasting motivation and satisfaction. And the person who can maintain momentum the longest and the deepest will come out ahead. Now, I trust that you already know what momentum feels like. It feels like you're moving forward, you're getting stuff done, you're seeing results. You're deeply engaged in what you're trying to do and the goal that you're trying to achieve. You think about it often. Some might even say that you are obsessed. You feel highly motivated. You default to taking action instead of procrastinating. You want to work, you want to be productive. It feels a lot better than the alternative, which is being unproductive and lazy. And when you have momentum, you also feel extremely confident. You're trusting the process. You have this internal feeling that deep down things are going to work out if you just continue doing what you're doing. But we often have momentum like this and then it fades away. It seems to just come and go. And most of us, we just let that happen. If we have momentum, that's great. If we don't, well, hopefully it comes again soon. But I think you can consciously and systematically build momentum and then maintain it. And that is what this video is all about. So there's this thing that I call the momentum cycle. Very simple. This cycle consists of first an action. You cannot build momentum unless you take initial action. Momentum is not built when you just sit around and you do nothing and you just think about things and you wait for it to come. You must take an action, some sort of action. And once you take that action, you hopefully get a win, some sort of success. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but just some result of your action, of your effort. And this leads to energy, motivation, and confidence, which builds momentum and enables you to take action again and again and again. And that's why it's a cycle, because you go around and around. So consider the person who wants to get fit and healthy, and they've been wanting to do so for a while. They've never built momentum. They've been thinking about it. And then one day they decide, that's it, I'm going to take action. And so they sign up to the gym and they do their first workout and they feel pretty good afterwards. And so they've got that initial win, which builds up some confidence. It builds up energy, it builds up motivation, and it builds up some momentum, which makes the next action a little bit easier. It's easier for them to go to the gym again and again and again, and they repeat that cycle. Now, this momentum cycle exists on both the macro level and the micro level. So let's say you're spending 3 months taking action on a project. Maybe you're trying to launch an online course or a digital product. You spend 3 months on this, you launch it, it does pretty well, you get this massive win, which leads to a ton of energy and confidence and motivation, which leads to more momentum carrying through to another project. Well, that would be an example of the momentum cycle working on a large scale. The action you took was 3 months of consistent effort, right? But if that was the only way we could experience momentum, then we wouldn't feel that motivated. We wouldn't get momentum that often because we're delaying that win for 3 months. And that's not very motivating. Fortunately, it exists on the micro cycle as well. So on a given day, you can experience this. You can take the action, which might be 3 hours of doing deep work, and from that you get a win. And maybe the win is that you cross off a bunch of tasks. Or maybe it's that you get into a flow state and you just feel really good about the work you've done. And so that's the micro cycle of momentum. You can get those small wins day to day that build up that energy and motivation and confidence, which make taking action the next day or even later in the day a lot easier. It goes without saying that momentum does not happen unless you do something. That is why the first part of the momentum cycle is that taking action. And this first step is often the hardest for most people. The gap between thought or idea and action is the gap between stagnation and momentum. The sooner you close that gap, the sooner you can start building lasting momentum. But people make this harder than it needs to be, right? They make the gap bigger than it needs to be. They think that they need to take action on something big to begin with, when really momentum comes from small, consistent actions over time combined with a big, challenging goal. Having a big, challenging goal is important if you want to act with intensity and velocity and build momentum. I talked about this in my last video called How to Achieve Insane Productivity, The Ultimate Guide. It's about 38 minutes long, so it's not a short watch, but it's definitely worth checking out. So you want to have that challenging goal, but the step that you take towards it today does not have to be a big step. In fact, the smaller you can make that step, the more likely you are to take action and close that gap between thought and idea and action. Now, making that first step along your journey towards your goal small is not a sign of a lack of ambition. It's a sign of intelligent productivity. So do whatever you can to close that gap and start taking action, even if it means doing a task stupidly easy and simple. Now, there's another aspect of momentum which isn't often talked about. It's this idea of the transferability of momentum. What do I mean by this? Well, I think that momentum in one area of life can transfer over to another area of life. To give you an example, I've noticed that when I'm crushing it with physical exercise, training, whether it's at the gym or running or at jiu-jitsu, that when I get wins in that area of life, I build massive momentum that then carries through into my work as well, because I have this general sense of energy and motivation and confidence. And vice versa, I've had wins in business that build up this energy, and I go to the gym and I hit PRs because I've got so much momentum, just generally speaking. You want to design your life in such a way that you can experience incremental progress and incremental wins in some area at least most of the time. If you only have one way to do this, then you have a single point of failure. So for example, let's say you only build your momentum through business. Well, there's going to be times in business and in work where you stagnate, and it might not even be your fault. It's just the way things are. It's where you're at in your business. Like, there's not much momentum. It's not a season of growth, like it's a season of maintenance. And so if you can't gain momentum from that, then it starts to get tricky. You can start feeling stuck or lost or tired. But if you can make progress in another area like health or fitness or a hobby that you're into, then that can transfer over into what might be a stagnating season in your work. One thing I've found helpful here is to have something in your life or work where you're a beginner. Because when you're a beginner in something, you gain a lot of momentum very quickly because the learning and the reward cycle is so tight, right? So think about the last time you learned a new skill. Maybe it was learn to play guitar. That first hour you started learning, you learned a ton of new stuff. Like, you were getting wins left, right, and center. As you get better and better, that learning, that reward cycle, it slows down a lot, it gets less, it gets looser, and it's harder to build momentum. I found that last year when I took up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that it built a lot of momentum for me, just generally speaking in life, because I would go to a class and I'd learn something new every time I went. And so I was getting those wins multiple times a week, which transferred over to other areas of my life. And before that, I'd spent probably about 2 years not really feeling like a beginner in anything. And I missed that feeling. I forgot about what it feels like to make incremental progress in something. So if anything, doing this, being a beginner again, it simply reminds you of what it feels like to make consistent progress, which we do need to be reminded of, especially if we are in a slump in life. Okay, so another tactic here, which I've talked about before in another video, is to have baseline goals and stretch goals. One reason a lot of people struggle to build momentum is because they make achieving their goals on a daily basis so difficult. And like I said, you should have a challenging goal, but you want to break it up into less challenging, easier, achievable tasks and sub goals. I've always found this advice hard to take because I didn't want to give myself an excuse to be mediocre. I understand that you're supposed to break down your goals and make them easier and so on and so on, but I also, what if I'm not doing enough? What if I'm making them too easy? What if I'm not hitting the limits of my potential on a daily basis? I want to be challenging myself every day, not doing the bare minimum. And so a useful strategy that I found, and something we do in Work Sprint as well, is to have a must-do baseline goal, an achievable baseline goal. This is something that you can achieve on your worst day. I mean that you wake up in the morning, you've got 3 hours of sleep, you're exhausted, maybe you're a bit under the weather, and you can still achieve it on that worst day. And then you have a stretch goal, which is anything beyond that, which most days you get to and you work on. But Maybe on your worst day, you don't get to it, but you've done your baseline goal. And so you maintain that consistency and momentum. To give you an example here to explain it a little bit better, my baseline goal every day is to write 1,000 words, right? I know that I can do that on my worst day. Like I mentioned before, I'm tired, I haven't slept well, maybe I'm under the weather. I can still sit there and I can get 1,000 words out. It might not be easy, but I can get it done. But my stretch goal is really to just write as much as I can. And so some days that looks like just over 1,000 words. I haven't got much to say, or I'm feeling tired. Most days it's around 3,000 to 4,000 words. And so I get a lot done. And the more that I get done, the more momentum I build. So setting that baseline goal and then having a stretch goal is a good way to not fall into the trap of just doing the bare minimum, but at the same time, not making things too difficult to the point where you can't build momentum at all. You kind of get the best of both worlds. You can maintain consistency and you can push yourself. Finally, one of the best ways to build and maintain momentum is to get into regular flow states. Flow is that feeling where you're deep in your work, you're fully engaged, time flies by. It's what a lot of us would call deep work. And this feeling of flow, like when you're in a flow state, it is inherently rewarding. It feels so damn good. And so if you can get yourself into these regular states of flow, then you build massive momentum. Why? Because the flow state itself becomes the win, regardless of whether the work you're actually doing produces results. And so you experience that momentum cycle just by working. For example, when I'm doing my deep work, I'm doing focused writing, I often get into flow. And when I'm in flow, I'm not thinking about how much money I'm gonna make from my writing or how many people will look at it. I'm just thinking about the work itself. And that's extremely rewarding. I crave that feeling and it builds momentum because I want it every day. I want to feel that flow every day. So by getting into those flow states, you can hack that momentum cycle, that reward cycle, without actually needing to get any external results. There's a lot of work that has been done on the concept of flow, so I won't go too much into it here, but keep in mind there are a few conditions that need to be in place for you to experience flow. The first is that your work needs to be sufficiently challenging. If it's too challenging, you won't get into flow because you'll be confused, you won't know where to start. It'll just be too hard to get into the zone. Also, if it's not challenging enough, then you're going to get bored. You're not going to need to be engaged enough, and so you're not going to experience flow. So it needs to be sufficiently challenging. You also need enough time. If you only have 10 to 15 minutes to work on a task, you probably won't get into flow because it takes a while to ramp up and get into the zone, right? For me, usually takes about 15 minutes before I'm fully in the zone when I'm doing deep work. And it's also for that reason that you should avoid distractions at all costs, because if you're 20 minutes into flow and someone interrupts you, you're going to be pulled out of that flow state, and it might take you a while to get back in. So you don't want that to happen. So that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a comment below, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.